meeting Colombian leader Gustavo Petro in Beijing. Our top story today, India's External Affairs Ministry has rejected China's attempt to rename 30 locations in Arunachal Pradesh last month, saying such practices will not alter the reality. Last month, China released the fourth list announcing Chinese and Tibetan names for 30 locations in the Indian state. The names will be reflected on official Chinese maps later this year. The Indian MEA has criticised China for continuing what it called vain and preposterous attempts to rename locations in Arunachal Pradesh. It said such actions are categorically rejected and do not change India's consistent position. The ministry asserted that creative naming exercises will not alter the undeniable reality that Arunachal Pradesh was, is, and will always remain an integral and inalienable part of India. This latest attempt is the fourth time Beijing has asserted its claim over the state. Despite New Delhi's multiple rejections, China claims the southern part of Arunachal Pradesh as its own, calling it the Tibet Autonomous Region, named Zagnan. China has repeatedly renamed locations in Arunachal Pradesh. A 2024 government notice quoted by Global Times banned unauthorized use or translation of foreign place names that undermine China's territorial claims. This latest action follows a similar incident in 2017 when China renamed several locations after the Dalai Lama visited Arunachal Pradesh. China condemned his visit, labeling him a separatist and accusing him of attempting to establish an independent Tibetan state. We are joined by Madhav Nalapat, editor of the Sunday Guardian, located in New Delhi, to discuss this in more detail. Professor Nalapat, thank you for joining us. What do you make of China's repeated attempts to rename Indian territory?
Well, I'd like to point out that there's absolutely no surprise. I'm surprised that if anyone would be surprised at this, the Chinese, frankly, are implacably opposed to the rise of India. And they have the most honeyed language in their diplomatic exchanges with India. And then in practice, they do this. So there's one thing in words, another in practice. And we have to look only at the practice, not the words. One thing I can tell you, China is implacably opposed to India growing because it sees India as a threat. They like it or not, whether President Trump has a trade deal today or not, the mechanics of the Cold War 2.0 between the US and China will be playing out, and Trump will have to reverse his decision on China, if not in the next 90 days, then definitely in the next 6 months or so. That is an irreconcilable difference between security interests of the United States and security interests of China. In much the same way, I would say India has irreconcilable security differences with China. Now remember, the US and India have generating the largest and the second largest trade surplus for China. These are both huge trade surpluses of which China is the beneficiary. I think it's important to look at this and to understand that China will be always implacably opposed to the rise of India, implacably opposed to the progress being made by India, because China knows the reality of Cold War 2.0. It knows there's a possibility of massive relocation from China, and it does not want India to be the beneficiary of that for simple reason. The other countries, ASEAN countries, are much smaller and really not much of a threat. But if India grows in size, then of course India becomes a threat basically to any industry remaining in China. In my personal view, decoupling is inevitable, and the Chinese, of course, are looking for alternatives. They're trying to produce in Thailand, Mexico, and all that, but it's only a matter of time before these subterfuges are discovered, and it is discovered that basically these are assembly plants for Chinese components, and in large numbers of them, Chinese labor. So I'd like to say this is another signal that China is implacably opposed to India. And I think it's important that we heed the symbols and not listen to those who say, oh, no, no, there's a prospect of peace between India and China. Ted.
Yes, and Professor Nalapat, how do you think India should respond to this, if it should even use its time doing that?
Look, there's no question that the Ministry of External Affairs has responded correctly, and there's no question about that. It has rubbished this effort by China, but that does not disguise the fact that Chinese maps that the territory is wrongly given, and does not disguise the fact that several times in the past they have, for example, Aksai Chin. On their maps, they showed Aksai Chin as part of China. At that point in time, the then government of India had no idea that they were moving into Aksai Chin. They only later, after it became a fait accompli, that they found out. So the reality situation is we can't wait for fait accomplis or fates accompli. We have to move now. And in my view, one answer would be a strong security alliance between India, Japan, Australia, and the US. Mutual security pact. The other three countries are already linked by security pact. India is the only outlier. I think it's time to give up this policy of non-alignment and understand this is a world that is getting aligned with either of the two superpowers. And if we want to be a third superpower, we'll also have to be aligned. So in my view, there's no question that we should align ourselves with the Quad, with the West, with Europe, with the United States, with Japan, and countries that are opposed, frankly, to expansionism by China, rampant expansionism. We cannot ignore this. In the government in the 1950s ignored it on Aksai Chin to its own cost. We cannot ignore this signal. And we are not ignoring this signal. Under Prime Minister Modi, extensive work has gone between to creating defense infrastructure in the border with China. And I think that work will continue, and India will be in full readiness at any point in time. Ted.
Okay, Professor Madhav Nalaput, thank you very much for your insight on the issue. We now move over to the Middle East, where a major meeting between US